Welcome to Staff Lawyers Claim Your Rights series. My name is Neil Fishman. Today we're going to talk about what to do if you've been accused of sexual harassment. This video refers equally to individuals who work for UN entities or other international organizations like the International Organization for Migration, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, and many others. We'll discuss what is sexual harassment, what types of evidence are used in cases of sexual harassment, what is a subject and what does it mean to be a subject, what are the possible sanctions, and what can you do if you've been accused of sexual harassment. First, sexual harassment is any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. This is a very expansive definition. It can refer to things that happen inside or outside of the workplace. If it's outside of the workplace, there needs to be a link to the workplace. Usually that link could be colleagues who have witnessed it or who have been subject to it, or it could be things that end up in the media or that draw disrepute on the organization, or things that could have happened at an organization-sponsored event. Those things can meet the interests of the organization and can lead to an issue of an accusation of sexual harassment. Examples of sexual harassment include sexual assault, which is extremely serious and can be even a criminal violation, sharing of images, communications, jokes in any format. What I mean by that is that in any format, it could be things that have occurred over your official email address, but they could even be things that have occurred on instant messenger, if that instant messenger was part of your work phone or was with work colleagues. Other examples are comments about appearances, rating individuals, name calling, and other demeaning comments. It is a very expansive definition. So how is sexual harassment proven? It's proven in 4 ways. The first way is by witnesses. It could be the complainant or it could be bystanders. The complainant is obviously very important because one can hear from that person about how the unwelcome conduct affected them and what did they experience. But also the corroboration comes from bystanders who could also testify that they saw what's the same inappropriate behavior that the complainant has described. There are also indirect witnesses. Indirect witnesses might be people that a complainant told about the incidences shortly after they occurred. For instance, the medical services or a close friend. Those people could say that something appeared to happen that negatively affected my colleague and left her or him in great distress. The second piece of evidence that's very important are documents or emails. Work email can always be checked by an organization. Personal email can only be checked with the consent of the individual who the organization has asked to share the emails. There's also physical evidence, such as items from the work office, other materials from the work environment, personal phones. Personal phones also can only be searched by an organization if the individual consents to the phone being searched. There's also forensic evidence that comes into play, PC or phone analysis, and in rare occasion, fingerprints can be taken. So what are subjects and the basic requirements of an investigation? In short, subjects are the target of an investigation. They are the person that the investigation services has determined might have committed misconduct or might have done something that could potentially be misconduct. So once someone is named as a subject, they are entitled to certain rights. The first right that everyone is entitled to in an investigation is it must be honest, impartial, and independent. It must be independent of the person who's made the complaint. It must be independent of the person who will ultimately decide what to do if the sexual harassment is proven. They also must be confidential. Organizations must be careful about sensitive information. They must have procedures in place to make sure that that information is protected. And finally, the most important due process right that a subject of an investigation or someone who's been targeted with a complaint of harassment that is now being investigated, they are all entitled to a presumption of innocence. That means that you don't have to prove your innocence. The organization must prove that you were guilty. What are your rights as a subject? Well, first of all, investigations must pursue all relevant evidence. This means inculpatory evidence, and inculpatory evidence is evidence that proves that the subject might have committed misconduct or might have done something that could be viewed as sexual harassment, but also exculpatory evidence. Exculpatory evidence is evidence that proves that one is innocent, that one did not do what they've been accused of doing. So an investigator, if they begin to investigate a case, they are supposed to look for inculpatory evidence and exculpatory evidence. They are not supposed to partially only look for evidence of guilt. They can also collect evidence about mitigating circumstances. These are things that prove that even if something happened, it was not particularly serious, or there were extenuating circumstances that show that the person who is viewed as responsible might not be quite as responsible as is being portrayed. They can also collect mitigating circumstances. Finally, an investigator is also required to follow up with witnesses, and not just witnesses of the complainant, but also witnesses who have been set forth by the subject as someone who could testify to the fact that nothing wrong had occurred. Generally speaking, employees of international organizations like the United Nations, they do have an obligation to cooperate with an investigation. In some circumstances, non-cooperation can be considered to be misconduct. Most organizations do not recognize a right to remain silent. The reason why is because they say that this is only about your job and it's not a criminal case. As of course many people know, that in criminal cases you generally have a right to remain silent in most jurisdictions. So as a consequence, in these type of investigations, whenever a subject is asked to provide evidence or to talk and answer questions about a particular event, there are some important risks. The first risk is a risk of self-incrimination. Someone might answer the questions in a way that shows that they were guilty of something. Another risk is that they could contaminate their own defense. And what I mean by this is that they could say things that might be taken out of context, that might be incorrect, or that might cast their credibility into dispute. For instance, if they don't recollect certain things and they say, oh, it happened this way, and then later on, after the investigation inquiry with them being heard by an investigator is over, and they're sitting at home and they realize, oh, well, it actually happened in a completely different way, but I misspoke when I talked to the investigator, there's always a risk that it injures their credibility because now they've made conflicting statements. Staff lawyer, we generally disagree with the practice of these organizations, and we believe that if you're being accused of misconduct and being subject to an investigation, you shouldn't have to be obliged to provide evidence against yourself in exchange for not being fired. We think that's wrong. We think there should be a right to protect yourself from self-incrimination, even in internal investigations. Finally, I will mention that the EPO does recognize this principle. If you'd like to influence your organization to do so, you should approach your staff association and try to militate in the direction of having your rules be changed and the right to be protected from self-incrimination be written into your rules. The sanctions for sexual harassment can be exceptionally serious. If proven, they will usually lead to a disciplinary process. The sanctions can lead to potential job loss, your loss of a grade, demotion, reassignment, loss of supervisory responsibilities. So there's a variety of consequences. All of them are very serious. One new outcome of sexual harassment cases is that the individual's name is often submitted to something known as ClearCheck. And ClearCheck is a list of individuals maintained by the UN agencies in which when someone goes for a new job, they check to see if you've been placed on ClearCheck. And if you've in the past been proven to have committed sexual harassment, your name could be on that list. What it results in is potentially you being de facto blacklisted from future employment in any UN agency, not just the one that you committed misconduct in. Additionally, many organizations now require when you submit an application for you check a box to disclose if you've ever been subjected to misconduct of any form or been investigated. This could require you to make some disclosures, and if your disclosures are not honest, then you could actually face the possibility of losing your job even after you've been hired for something that happened in the past. Finally, there is a risk now of some criminal liability coming into play in certain allegations, particularly those related to sexual assault. But even in some countries, sexual harassment in and of itself can be viewed as a crime in certain circumstances. So these are exceptionally serious situations. What can one do if they're accused of sexual harassment? The most important thing to do is to take the allegation seriously from the very beginning. Document your interactions. Organize and archive your files. If you have evidence that's relevant, you should make sure you have it organized for yourself. If things happen verbally, you should sit down and write down what happened, write the dates, times, what happened, who witnessed it, and all the relevant information that you can remember. Another thing you could do is once you've been accused of sexual harassment, you should seek clarity from your organization about what are your rights. So you should collect the procedures that relate to investigations, relate to disciplinary processes, and relate to sexual harassment, and read those. Finally, a last piece of advice is to seek legal advice if you need it, preferably early. Some organizations like the United Nations Secretariat, they have an Office of Staff Legal Assistance. Other organizations, their staff associations have got lawyers that they work with, and then there are also private lawyers. Generally speaking, when one seeks legal assistance early, they're more able to defend their rights. Thank you very much.